Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this Microfiche time capsule, we are continuing our series on the first presidency, and today we're talking about Gordon B. Hinckley. So this article is from the Improvement Era from December 1961. And this article is entitled Gordon B. Hinckley of the Quorum of the 12. And actually it has kind of a pre-title here. It's called Report Changes in the Leading Quorums of the Church, next 8 pages. So this one is not all about Gordon B. Hinckley, the next 8 pages. Although his article is semi-long, medium long, I guess. I'm not sure why, but yeah, that's really interesting to me. So, because at this time he had just been called into the Quorum of the 12, which is why he has an article here. Before that he was an assistant, yeah? So what do I know about Gordon B. Hinckley? I actually know quite a bit about him. The reason being is that I have read his biography, and this was several years ago, so I don't remember all of the details. But his biography by Sherry L. Dew, and I believe it's something ridiculous, like 800 pages. Oh yeah, and this article is by Wendall J. Ashton, by the way. Almost missed that. Anyway, what do I know about him? So he is the son of Bryant S. Hinckley with his second wife that he married after the death of his first wife, so I do not believe he was a polygamist. And he was the eldest son of his second wife. And he had a brother who was an Irish twin, so he was just almost exactly a year younger than him. And they were quite close, and I can't remember his name at the moment. I'm hoping that they will mention it. He grew up with quite a lot of freedom, and that, you know, he was allowed to go outside and do stuff and play and whatever. And they lived in Fort something or other in Utah that, I can't remember the name of it, that Bryant S. Hinckley helped kind of found, I believe, or was that his father? Now I can't, see, I'm getting some details mixed up already. It's been a long time since I've read the article, and he was the grandson of Ira Hinckley, and he was one of the kind of founders of Utah back in the day. Also, we have talked about Alonzo A. Hinckley, and Alonzo A. Hinckley was not his father, he was his uncle, I believe. And yeah, so he's the brother of Bryant S. Hinckley. Anyways, Gordon B. Hinckley went on a mission to England, and it was fairly well known that he did not have a lot of success at the beginning, and he felt very discouraged. And he wrote to his father and asking him that he should go home. He should say, you know what, we're wasting time, we're wasting money, I shouldn't be here, you know, this isn't doing anything. And his father said, forget yourself and go to work. Yeah, and he really internalized that, because that was kind of the, you know, method of his life. He was very good with words, and so he became a journalist, and then it wasn't too long after he started working, where he did a couple of jobs, this and that, I mean, you know, Great Depression, that he was then hired by the church to do like some copywriting kinds of things. And then he was working with Richard L. Evans, and that's around the time he was called to the as an assistant. And so he and Richard L. Evans would write, like, for example, music in the spoken word. That was one of his jobs, was to make sure that that was written properly. And that he tended to write a lot, and people used to look askance at him and how much paper he was using, things like that. And that was back in the day when everything was typewritten, so he was quite a typist, I imagine. And he was just very prolific, and lots of people liked what he wrote. And eventually he was called to the Quorum of the 12, which is at this time. He was in the Quorum of the 12 for a good amount of years, 1961 until, when was it, 1980-ish, when under President Spencer W. Kimball, he was called as the third counselor in the first presidency. That was not unprecedented. There had been additional counselors in the past. Under David O. McKay, for example, had several other counselors, as well as Brigham Young and Joseph Smith. So Spencer W. Kimball calling extra counselors wasn't really a big deal. So Gordon B. Hinckley at first wasn't sure why he was called to his office. He was like, Spencer W. Kimball was like, I'm thinking of calling a third counselor. And he's like, okay, that's a good idea, because he knew that the other two counselors were starting to feel the effects of age, I should say, that their health was declining. And then he was like, I don't know why you're telling me this. And then he's like, yeah, and I want you to be the counselor. And he was absolutely floored. He was like, wait, what? And and he was called as a counselor in the first presidency. And very shortly thereafter, or around the same time, the health of all three of the other members of the first presidency continued to decline, to the point that President Hinckley was kind of carrying them. He's like, all right, I'll do it. I got lots of things to do. He was very much a doer, and he was asked to travel quite a bit because the others couldn't. So he was going places all over the world. He was going to Japan. He was going, I mentioned Japan specifically because Asia was like the area he was sent to the most often. He went to Australia. He went to the Philippines, he went to a lot of areas in that part of the world. And then President Kimball died, and then President Benson became president of the church. And then he called Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson as his counselors. And the two of them also carried the church, because it wasn't long after that when the health of President Benson declined to the point where he could barely speak, and therefore was unable to perform any duties. And I do know that some people had accused the church of hiding President Benson's condition. I don't believe that they were hiding it, is because they weren't making any policy changes. They weren't pretending that he was making decisions. They were just continuing business as usual. I don't think they made any major decisions that would require the president of the church. They made decisions that were acceptable to make with the leadership that they had. And so, I don't think that they were hiding it at all. He was like, no, I'm doing everything. It's fine, And in that time, and then President Hunter became president, and he was once again first and second counselors, Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson. And then when President Hinckley became president of the church in 1995, and he chose as his counselors Thomas S. Monson and James E. Faust. And then they were in there a long time. He was president of the church from 1995 to 2008, which is when he finally passed away. But he had ridiculous amounts of energy and leadership and just ability to stand up and get things done up almost until the very, very end. And he lost his wife 2 years or something like that, or it might have been 4, before he passed away. And so it was just right on that break right there. So he and his wife were really sweet, and everybody liked her as well, Marjorie Pay Hinckley. They had 5 children, I believe, if I'm not miscounting them. And they were really close to everyone, although they did understand that their father was very busy, so they mostly went to their mother, but for everyday things. But, they did have a good relationship with their father as well. Anyway, sorry, that is a very swift rundown of what I know about him. I'm hoping that this article will give us some more insights into the past and when he was younger, up until he was called as an apostle, because that's part of the area that I don't remember as clearly. So I'm hoping that will be what they express to us. Anyway, so let's take a look at the article. He looked like the times in which he lived. He was lean, and freckles were beginning to fade from his thin face. In a few days, he would be 23. His name was Gordon Bittner Hinckley, and the roses were just beginning to bloom across Salt Lake Valley in 1933. But conditions in America were anything but rosy. It was the bottom of the Great Depression. People saying, "Brother, can you spare a dime?" and men who once had prospered were selling apples on the streets. Gordon Hinckley, who had graduated from the University of Utah a year earlier, had been working at a small job to put together enough money to take him to Columbia University to continue his studies in English and journalism. Oh yeah, I forgot that he studied in Columbia. Then a tall man stepped in, John C. Duncan, Bishop of the First Ward of Liberty Stake. A mission was discussed. Relatively few young men were getting mission calls then. Parents just did not have the means. Gordon Hinckley had always been a faithful boy in the church, but now college and a love of literature lifted his eyes toward a career in journalism. But he answered the challenge of the church, and that was the beginning of a new life for him, a life that was to become a mission instead of a career. That first mission actually lasted 28 years, except for 2 years during World War II. I'm not sure why they said that. Okay. Elder Hinckley's mission reached a new crest on a Saturday morning of 1961, the last day of December. The sun was just beginning to send its glow towering Mount Olympus at the east of Gordon and Marjorie Hinckley's white frame house in East Mill Creek. Marjorie answered the telephone at about 7 o'clock. It was President David O. McKay. When Gordon B. Hinckley greeted President McKay 45 minutes later, a new call came to the Council of the 12. Later that day, Elder Hinckley was sustained an apostle, a witness for Jesus the Christ. Can you imagine being called the same day? You get a call that you're going to be called into the Quorum of the 12, and then they're like, yeah, we'd like to sustain you today. You know? That's so crazy to me they used to do that. I think that they still do to a certain extent, but I don't think not as much, you know? They give you a little bit of a heads up. Next day, at the concluding conference session, the new apostle said with his typically sincere over-the-back fence eloquence, "I would like to say that this cause is either true or false. Either this is the kingdom of God, or it is a sham and a delusion. Either Joseph talked with the Father and the Son, or he did not. If he did not, we are engaged in a blasphemy. If he did, we have a duty from which none of us can shrink, to declare to the world the living reality of the God of the universe, the Father of us all, and his Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, our Redeemer, the author of our salvation, the Prince of Peace. I give you my testimony that this is true." Gordon B. Hinckley had spoken words like those 26 years before, from a portable wooden stand to a shifting critical crowd in London's Hyde Park. Now we're jumping back to his mission. That testimony has guided his actions since, and through nearly 3 decades, he in turn has cast a mighty imprint on the unfolding missionary effort of the restored church. Elder Hinckley began his missionary labors in Preston, a town of spires and green hedges in a cloudy North England. The gospel harvest was sparse in Britain when Elder Hinckley began knocking on tenement doors and preaching at night in Preston's lonely market square. Okay, I'm going to pause here because I completely forgot to look at the pictures. First of all, this picture right here is on the cover. Sorry about that. There were a whole bunch of articles in this magazine on different people, so he was one of the people who made the cover. So I think it's funny to see a picture of him so young, though, because, you know, the iconic picture of him, he's much older. He's probably, aged 30, 40 years. Anyways, this is another picture of him on the first page, and it doesn't have a caption, so it's just this portrait of him. And then this picture is from the next page. It says, "Pictured is the Gordon B. Hinckley family. Front row, left to right, Clark, Cynthia. Back row, Virginia, Sister Hinckley, Elder Hinckley, and granddaughter Heather Barnes, Kathleen Hinckley Barnes, and Alan Barnes. Insert Richard G., serving on a mission in Germany." Yeah, they had 5 children, I'm pretty sure. So there are the 2 kids in the front are theirs, and then the one inset as well. And then on the left-hand side of the picture, there is his daughter, and then his wife, and then himself, and then his other daughter and her husband and this baby. So he had 2 sons and 3 daughters. Yeah. It looks like his daughter, Heather, is the oldest, I believe. Oh no, the granddaughter's Heather. His daughter's Kathleen. Sorry. Okay, get it right. All right. Moving on in the article. Sorry, I forgot to look at the picture. So, In 1933, a total of 525 missionaries were sent into the field. Approximately 7,000 converts were being brought into the church each year then in all of the missions of the world. In the year that Elder Hinckley has been called to the Council of the 12, there are more than 9,000 missionaries in 64 missions around the world. Their harvest of souls will approximate 90,000 this year. Yeah, and it's way more today. Following his labors in Lancashire, England, Elder Hinckley was assigned to London, where he became assistant to Elder Joseph F. Merrill of the Council of the 12, presiding over the European mission. When Elder Hinckley returned to Salt Lake City after a successful completion of his mission, he was asked by President Merrill to meet with the First Presidency concerning the missions in Europe. President Heber J. Grant said, "Brother Hinckley, we'll give you 15 minutes. What? Oh, that's right. He had to report on the mission because he was an assistant to the president, the mission president, and he had to report to the First Presidency on the state of the mission. Can you imagine doing that? Gosh, I forgot about that. Yeah, I do remember reading about that. 1 hour and 15 minutes later, the young missionary emerged from the room. In a few days, President David O. McKay, then second counselor in the First Presidency, called Elder Hinckley and told him that the church would like him to become executive secretary of the Church Radio Publicity and Mission Literature Committee. Yeah, I told you he worked for the church. Oh, Stephen L. Richards. I'm sorry, I thought it was Richard L. Evans. I always get them mixed up, and I think it's the Richard in it. They don't even really look alike, and Stephen L. Richards was way older. So I like a full generation. I think he was 20 years older. So I'm sorry about that. But yeah, Stephen L. Richards, then of the Council of the 12, was chairman. He went to work in getting out film strips, picturing the Mormon pioneers, the temples, modern-day prophets, the Book of Mormon, and other subjects. As the years rolled on, he turned his versatile skills to other missionary tools, and for a quarter of a century, he supervised the LDS Sunday evening KSL radio programs. He wrote 2 books to assist missionaries. He authored and produced, continued on page 978, a major part of the classical Fullness of Times recordings. In 39 episodes of the history of the church, they were played over hundreds of radio stations around the globe. He also wrote and produced the popular New Witness for Christ series. Yeah, and another thing I completely forgot was there was a setup at the World's Fair. Then he completely designed that. So, I mean, that he was a big, major part. Oh, they're about to mention it. Sorry. Okay. Elder Hinckley wrote or edited scores of gospel tracts and pamphlets. He supervised a corps of specialists translating the Book of Mormon and other scriptures into many tongues. In 1939, he designed and supervised the erection of the church exhibit at the San Francisco World Fair on Treasure Island. The exhibit was in the form of a scale model of the Salt Lake Tabernacle, in which organ recitals and illustrated lectures were presented. Tens of thousands of people poured through. Yeah, I remember that, being really impressed by that. That's a big job, and yeah, that's impressive. He was so creative. Also, he had to come up with a way to smuggle in the slides that they used in the temple ceremonies into Europe. I believe it was for the Swiss temple. I can't remember exactly, but yeah, I remember reading about that and how that was a big deal. Anyway. Continuing his work with missions, he was in 1951 named Executive Secretary of the General Missionary Committee. He arranged broadcasts of the general conferences of the church and the far from private wire hookups for the general priesthood meeting during conference. On April 6, 1958, Elder Hinckley was called to be an assistant to the Council of the 12. Yep. His typically tangy humor opened his tabernacle remarks that day. "My dear brethren and sisters, I am reminded of a statement made by my first missionary companion when I received a letter of transfer to the European Mission Office. After I had read it, I turned it over to him. He read it and then said, 'Well, you must have helped an old lady across the street in the pre-existence. This has not come because of anything you've done here.'" Gee, thanks. Since becoming a general authority, in addition to his service with the Missionary Committee, he has supervised the Northern and Southern Far East missions and the Hawaii mission of the church. Twice he has visited mission areas in Hawaii, Japan, Korea, Okinawa, is that not Japan? Hong Kong, Taiwan, and the Philippines. In all his labors, he has kept close to the heartbeats of the missionaries themselves. He has been with them in the London fog, in the cold Swiss rain, in the Montana wind, and in the humid heat of the Orient. He has helped them when sick, comforted them when bereaved, encouraged them when despondent, sorrowed with them in their tragedies, and rejoiced with them in their tremendous accomplishments. He has been on his knees with many a young man in distress. In all the difficult years during and since the Korean War, Elder Hinckley has handled their complex problems incident to selective service in the military. In his frequent meetings with draft officials and military officers, his policy has been to get the facts and compose the difficulty equitably for all concerned. The procedures which have been developed out of these discussions have made it possible for thousands of our young men to go on missions and also meet the military obligations imposed by Congress. On one of his most strenuous and far-reaching assignments has been in preparation of the temple ordinances in various languages. Named in 1953 to work with President Joseph Fielding Smith and Richard L. Evans, he has supervised the production of temple materials in English, French, German, Dutch, Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish, Spanish, Tongan, Tahitian, Samoan, and Maori. Okay, he doesn't speak any of those languages. I'm just going to throw that out there. He arranged for them to be translated. He didn't do it himself. He makes it sound like he did. No, he just coordinated it. Right. He was then sent by the First Presidency to participate in the dedication and opening of ordnance work in the Swiss, New Zealand, and London temples. Few men in this century have worked more intimately or as long with the church missionary effort, its mission presidents, and the missionaries. During World War II, there came an event which could have drastically altered the course of his life. Shortly after the attack on Pearl Harbor plunged America into war late in 1941, he applied at the United States Navy Recruiting Office for officer training. But he was rejected because of a history of allergies. Allergies, of all things, reasons to reject someone. You get hay fever, you can't be an officer. That's so weird. So to assist otherwise with the war effort, he went to work with the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad Company as a station master. He called the trains, that's right. I remember he worked in Denver for a while. The railroad company promoted him to assistant manager of mail baggage and express for the entire system. This took him and his family to Denver. With the end of the war, Elder Stephen L. Richards asked him to return to the church office. Railroad officials asked him to take a 90-day leave and return if he wished. About a year later, Elder Hinckley received a call from Denver. He decided to stay at his post with the church. "This is the Lord's work," he told a friend. "I felt I would make my best contribution in life by continuing to do my humble part to further the cause." And Gordon B. Hinckley, like Samuel of old, grew on and was in favor both with the Lord and also with men. Elder Hinckley is blessed with a noble heritage. He is a member of the Society of Mayflower Descendants. His forebear, Samuel Hinckley, was governor of Massachusetts Colony in 1680. His grandfather, Ira Nathaniel Hinckley, was born in Upper Canada. In 1835, when he was 7, his family first heard the gospel preached by Mormon missionaries. When Ira was 7, not when Gordon was 7. Okay, just thought I'd throw that out there. 2 years later, Ira was an orphan. Okay, when he was 16, he accompanied his stepfather and his family to Nauvoo. There, Ira often heard the prophet Joseph Smith preach in the grove west of the temple. Ira Hinckley crossed the plains to Utah in 1850. Then, on a call from President Brigham Young, he erected historic Cove Fort, that's what it is, in central Utah. I knew it was something fort, yeah. He previously had been called to build the stone schoolhouse and church in Colville. It was there that his son Bryant S., Gordon's father, was born. An articulate and practical man, Bryant S. Hinckley became a leader in the church, as teacher, author, speaker, and administrator. At the age of 93, he died just 4 months before his son Gordon was sustained as an apostle, so just recently to this time, yeah. Gordon's mother, Ada Bittner Hinckley, was a cultured woman. Before her marriage, she was Utah's first Greg shorthand teacher at LDS College. She also taught English, and as a bride, she brought a baby grand piano into their new home. That's cool. Gordon B. Hinckley was born on June 23, 1910. His first home was a 2-story gray frame house with white shutters and trim on the southwest corner of Windsor and 7th South Streets in Salt Lake City. Gordon is one of 11 living children, his mother's eldest son. Yeah, his father's second wife, yeah. At 2, he was stricken with whooping cough, which left him frail and weak. The boy needs more fresh air and sunlight, the doctor said. That was a factor in his father's purchasing a farm in the East Mill Creek area. Gordon's earliest recollection is that of watching the stonemason lay the rocks for the fireplace in the Hinckley's farmhouse. Interesting. For the summer months of every year, this became the Hinckley family home. It later was the first home of the newlyweds, Gordon and Marjorie Hinckley. I'm just going to throw this out there. I have recently understood that whooping cough, which you can absolutely get vaccinated for today, but was way more prevalent back then, is really, really bad. Like, it's most dangerous for little babies. And that if you get it as an adult, you can be coughing so badly that you throw up, that you go into convulsions, like all sorts of fun stuff. And then little babies will literally stop breathing and will turn blue. And like that, it can absolutely kill you. And what's more is once you've gotten over the worst of it and you're starting to recover, it takes months to recover from. So he probably, it wasn't that it left him frail forever, but he was recovering for probably the better part of a year. And that is why his father decided to move to Mill Creek. Isn't that crazy? Moved to Mill Creek to be near the water, and so he had more humid air. Like, I don't know if that helped, but yeah, he eventually recovered. But like, wow, that's just crazy to me. Gordon's appetite for literature came naturally. His mother often read to her children from good books. Then there was his father's spacious home library. But if Gordon liked books, he did not, as a boy, care for school. He kicked up a terrible fuss when he started at Hamilton grade school. As with many boys, he often tussled with his younger brother Sherman, bigger in body. Yeah, Sherman was his Irish twin. He's just exactly a year younger than him. Sherman was later to become a successful mining executive. One day, their father tossed a pair of boxing gloves before them. Now, the next time you want to fight, put these on, move outside, and go after it in style, right, as Hinckley said. Okay, yeah, if you're going to fight anyway, you might as well learn to do it properly. My parents were wise disciplinarians, Gordon Hinckley later said. I never recall their punishing us children physically. That's good. Gordon feasted on work, developing Spartan-like courage and determination, and he could make stalled cars run, and while still a youth, he could handle household electric, carpentry, and plumbing repairs. At Christmas time, the Hinckley family library sparked with his miniature scenes complete with lights. On the family farm, he raised strawberries, corn, tomatoes, peaches, pears, and cherries. His first paying job was as carrier for the Deseret News. Years later, he was named to the board of directors and executive committee on the Deseret News Publishing Company. Yeah. Also to the board of directors of the parent company of KSL Radio and Television. By the time he reached college, Gordon was beginning to gain a reputation as a speaker. It was announced one day that United States Senator Reed Smoot would give an address at the First Ward's conference, a sacrament meeting. Okay. Senator Smoot was a member of the Council of 12. Something developed on Saturday which took the senator away. The bishop had to adjust fast. Sunday morning, he called in two of his boys, bosom pals. They had been ward teaching companions, though both were only about 20. The bishop asked them to prepare to substitute for Senator Smoot that night. Can you imagine? Like, you're like, okay, and one of the apostles and senator of the United States is going to give a talk at his place, and lots of people are coming. And it turns out he can't come, he canceled. So, hey, how about you give a talk? Like, oh my gosh. Gordon Hinckley had a watering turn to handle that day at the family farm. He handled it, but was there on the stand at sacrament meeting before an overflow congregation who had come to hear Senator Smoot. Okay, so he was like a substitute of the substitute. An overflow congregation, like this is the second meeting, yeah? When Gordie Hinckley finished speaking, recalled his companion Bob, Robert F. Zontag, people had forgotten all about Senator Smoot's absence. The boy really stirred them. Oh, good for him. Gordon Hinckley had been acquainted with his sweetheart and wife from childhood days. She is brown-eyed, dark-haired, bright, and intelligent Marjorie Pay. They were married in the Salt Lake Temple, April 29, 1937, and soon moved into the Hinckley farmhouse in East Mill Creek, with Gordon himself installing the furnace and laying the brick flue. But 2 years later, they built their present home nearby. They have been blessed with 3 daughters, Kathleen, Mrs. N. Allen Barnes, Virginia, and Cynthia Jane, and also 2 sons, Richard, now a missionary in Germany, and Clark. Elder Hinckley served in several church positions in Liberty Stake, including Stake's Sunday School superintendent. He was called to the Sunday School General Board at the age of 27, serving in this capacity for 9 years. The Sabbath school lessons that he wrote on the Old Testament and the Book of Mormon are still in use throughout the church. Well, at the time, in 1961 they were. He has won wide acclaim as a writer and speaker and has distinguished himself as an administrator. In 1946, he was called to the East Mill Creek Stake Presidency, and in 1956, he became stake president, the third generation Hinckley to hold that high office. Ira N. Hinckley had been the first president of Millard Stake in central Utah, and Bryant S. Hinckley had served as Liberty Stake president for many years. East Mill Creek Stake under President Hinckley faced great challenges, for it is situated in one of the most rapidly growing areas in the state of Utah. During the years that Elder Hinckley served in the presidency, 15 new wards were created, and the stake was twice divided and became 4 large stakes. One day, the stake president marked a spot in the fields, where as a farm boy he had roamed, and at once the walls of a spacious new stake center began arising. The stake purchased a 250-acre welfare farm, and priesthood quorums and auxiliary organizations began collecting dimes and dollars to buy Herefords and hogs. This stake grew in sinew under one of its longtime sons. Other East Mill Creek undertakings felt the influence of Gordon B. Hinckley's straight-from-the-shoulder wisdom. For 2 years, he was president of the Civic League, also a director of the water company. During these days, he and his brother Sherman created 2 new subdivisions in the area, and in downtown business, he was one of the organizers of Recording Arts, Inc., of which he is now vice president. A broad, many-sided background, rich in missionary service and leadership, moves into the Council of the 12 with the new apostle. As G. Homer Durham, president of Arizona State University, an intimate friend of Gordon B. Hinckley through some 40 years, said, "Like his father, Gordon has magnificent gifts of written and oral expression. His judgment stands up in every situation. His insight into human character and situations is rich and meaningful. He knows when silence is better than utterance. He has a sense of humor that endears him to all." A resident in East Mill Creek described him also. "Out our way, some of the scrub oak on the mountainside grows extra tall and slender. Those trees are the first to catch the morning sun, but they give shade that draws people to them. They have seen hard winters. Snows pile high around them. They stand firm through the storms. They are solid and lofty too. Gordon Hinckley is like that, a slender oak." It's kind of a strange ending. I'm not gonna lie. Well, it's interesting that they mention an oak tree, though. I mean, just because, tree-wise. Because I remember when the conference center was being built, I guess. And one of the things that he thinks was really cool was that there was a tree that he had planted himself on his own property. And it was a black walnut tree, and it was dying. And knowing that the conference center was being built, he suggested that they cut down the black walnut tree and use the wood from that walnut tree to make the pulpit of the conference center. And that was one of the big cool things when the conference center was dedicated that he talked about, and how honored he was to have that ability to do that. Anyways, I really like this article. I think it's really good. I think they covered a lot of ground, but obviously not all of it, because, he lived a long time after this. All right, so let's take a look at the Wikipedia article and see if there's anything major in here. So, Gordon Bittner Hinckley, June 23, 1910 to January 27, 2008, was an American religious leader and author who served as the 15th president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS Church, from March 1995 until his death in January 2008 at age 97. Considered a prophet, seer, and revelator by church members, Hinckley was the oldest person to preside over the church in its history until Russell M. Nelson surpassed his age in 2022. Yep. That was recent, and he's still the oldest, and he will be the oldest until his death. Anyway, Hinckley's presidency was noted for the building of temples, which more than half of existing temples being built under his leadership. Yes, I remember that. I remember when that was announced. I'm trying to remember when it was. I think it was 97 or something like that, when he announced that he wanted there to be 100 temples before the year 2000. And people were like, wait, what? is that even possible? Because I think we were at like 30 something, or maybe 47 or something like that. And they're like, that's a lot? Is that even humanly possible? And then he started announcing them. He's like, okay, so we are currently under construction over buildings in, and he started listing places, and you're like, holy cow, what? And it was because he had this vision of small temples. You don't have to have a ginormous structure everywhere in order to have a temple. All you need is like a certain number of rooms. And he said, this is the minimum. He even drew it out and said, this is the minimum that is required for a temple. I think that minimal temples in lots of places would be way better than having like really big temples in very few places, because the travel would be so much easier, yeah? And I like that idea. So, and it's totally worked. It was a great idea. And yeah. All right. He oversaw the construction of the Nauvoo, Illinois temple. Yeah, it was a reconstruction, yeah. And the building of the 21,000-seat conference center. Yep. During his tenure, the family, a proclamation to the world, was issued. Okay, but we talked about this last week when we talked about Howard W. Hunter, is that he actually started that. It's just that it wasn't able to be finished before his death. So I don't know if I would attribute that to President Hinckley. That's more of a Howard W. Hunter thing, in my opinion. And the Perpetual Education Fund was established. At the time of his death, approximately 1/3 of the church's membership had joined the church under Hinckley's leadership. Yeah, well, that's just regular exponential growth here. Hinckley was awarded 10 honorary doctorate degrees, and in 10, wow, that's a lot. In 2004, the Presidential Medal of Freedom by George W. Bush. Yeah, I remember that. He also received the Boy Scouts of America highest award, the Silver Buffalo, and served as chairman of the Church Boards of Trustees/Education. Hinckley died of natural causes on January 27, 2008. His wife, Marjorie Pay, died in 2004. Yeah. He was succeeded as church president by Thomas S. Monson, who has served as his first counselor in the first presidency, and more importantly, was president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles according to LDS doctrine. Okay, I don't know why they're going so far into it in the introduction. Like, dude, that's relatively common knowledge. You could have put that into like an article on like first presidency and succession. But yeah, like we know this. All right, early years we already learned about. I don't think there's anything here that's new. He studied in the University of Utah, has a BA in English literature with a minor in Latin and ancient Greek. Okay. And, he wrote the words for the LDS hymn number 135, My Redeemer Lives. I know that my Redeemer lives. Yeah, that one. It's, that was his, if you look at the author. Church employment. Hinckley returned to the United States in 1935 after completing a short tour of the European continent, including preaching in both Berlin and Paris. He was given an assignment by his mission president, Joseph F. Merrill, to meet with the church's first presidency and request that better materials be made available to missionaries for proselytizing. As a result of this meeting, Hinckley received employment as executive secretary of the church's Radio Publicity and Missionary Literature Committee. Yeah. And that was a paid position, yeah. Hinckley's responsibilities included developing the church's fledgling radio broadcasts and making use of the era's new communication technologies. One of the projects Hinckley oversaw in the late 1930s was development of the church's exhibit for the Golden Gate International Exposition. Yeah, talked about all of these. So, in 1935, Hinckley also worked as a seminary teacher for the church education system. He, however, decided to focus solely on the work with the Radio Publicity and Missionary Literature Committee. Okay? Not sure why they said that, but okay. Starting in 1937, he served on the Sunday School General Board after the Second World War, during which he left full-time LDS Church to... LDS Church. I think they mean church service? Employed. Okay, church employed. Okay, I got it. To work for a time with the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad. Hinckley served as executive secretary to the church's missionary committee. He also served as the church's liaison to Deseret Book, working with Deseret Book's liaison to the church, Thomas S. Monson. Yeah, that's how they met. At various times, especially in the late 1940s, Hinckley was also a reporter for the Church News, and a publication of the Deseret News. In early 1950s, Hinckley was part of a committee that considered how to present the temple ordinances at the Swiss temple. That's what I said. The concern was how this could be done when a need existed to provide them in at least 10 languages. The concern was eventually solved through the use of a film version of the endowment, and he smuggled them over himself. Hinckley's background in journalism and public relations prepared him well to preside over the church during a time when it was received increasing media coverage. He had learned to use new technology to spread the word of God, developed positive relationships with people of other faiths, and studied and written works of church history. These experiences would serve as a foundation for the service he would give for the rest of his life. In 1957, Hinckley was named to the board of directors of KSL. Shortly after, he was named to the executive committee of the board. Family. On April 29, 1937, Hinckley married Marjorie Pay, November 23rd, in the Salt Lake Temple. They had 5 children, including Richard G. Hinckley, an LDS Church General Authority, between 2005 and 2011, and Virginia Hinckley Pierce, a former member of the church's Young Women General Presidency. Another of their daughters, Kathleen Hinckley Barnes Walker, co-authored several children's books with Virginia and ran an events company. Her first husband, Alan Barnes, died in 2001, and in 2004 she married M. Richard Walker. The Walkers served from 2005 to 2008 as president and matron of the Salt Lake Temple, and lived in Preston, England from 2011 to 2013, while Richard served as president of the Missionary Training Center. Well, it sounds like they are all very close still. Yeah? I mean, if they're working together, they're still, doing stuff, and, it's quite admirable. Hinckley's other son, Clark, has also served in several church leadership positions, including stake president and president of the church's Spain-Barcelona mission, 2009 to 2012, and the first president of the Tijuana, Mexico Temple, 2015 to 2018. That's pretty cool. LDS Church Service, local leadership. After returning to East Mill Creek at the end of employment with the railroad, Hinckley was called as a counselor in the presidency of the church's East Mill Creek stake. He later served as president of that stake until about 6 months after his call as an assistant to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. During his time as stake president, Hinckley oversaw the building of several chapels. General authority. I'm sorry, I'm flying through this because this was all mentioned in the article, okay? So I don't want to miss anything, but I also don't want to repeat so much, so I'm trying to go through it fairly quickly. In 1958 General Conference, Hinckley became a church general authority as an assistant to the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, a position that was later discontinued. One of his first assignments as a general authority was participating in the dedication in the same month of the New Zealand Temple. In August 1958, Hinckley traveled to England, where he was involved in the London Temple open house and dedication. As a general authority, Hinckley continued to work with the missionary department, and after the death of Richards, he worked closely with Henry D. Moyle. In early 1960, Hinckley was given responsibility for overseeing LDS church operations in Asia. Told you he was over Asia. His first trip there in the spring of 1960 lasted 2 months and involved going to Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and the Philippines. In the Philippines, he worked on getting government approval for missionaries to be sent. He returned to Asia on a second trip in April 1961, which included a meeting to inaugurate missionary work in the Philippines. During this trip, he also was in Seoul, South Korea during the May 16 coup. I never heard of it, but I'm sure people in the Philippines have. Hinckley wired a story on the coup to the Deseret News. Good for him. In June 1961, Hinckley was one of the General Authority presenters at the first Missionary President Training Seminar and was involved in the presentation of the first standardized missionary lesson plan. In September 1961, Hinckley became an apostle in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. He filled a vacancy created by Hugh B. Brown being added to the first presidency as the third counselor to David O. McKay. After his call as an apostle, Hinckley continued to be a leader in the missionary department, with Boyd K. Packer serving as one of his key aides. Hinckley was also appointed the chair of the All-Church Coordinating Council's Children's Section. Wow, that was random. Hinckley also continued to oversee the church's operations in Asia. In February 1962, he made the first trip to Asia on which he was accompanied by his wife Marjorie. On the trip, they visited the Philippines, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. On his return, he held training seminars with missionaries in California and Illinois in cooperation with Moyle, and he later held training seminars in all 23 missions in Europe. The seminars were credited with being the main force behind higher rates of conversion over the coming summer. Also, in 1962, Hinckley was involved in the negotiations that led to the LDS Church purchasing the shortwave radio station WRUL. Okie dokie. Meanwhile, Hinckley also dedicated a chapel in French Polynesia on the island of Huahina. a group of Latter-day Saints returned to their home island on their boat, which sank with 15 drowning. Oh, really? Hinckley canceled his return to Utah and took a voyage on a sailing vessel to preside at the funeral. I did not remember that at all. Wow. Oh, so there were 15 members of the church that drowned on their way home from the dedication of a chapel in French Polynesia. It's Tahiti. It's Tahiti. Why don't we just say Tahiti? Wow, I did not remember that. But that is quite admirable that he would take the time to go visit the people who were hurting, yeah. In late 1963, Hinckley made another tour of the Philippines, Japan, and South Korea, this time bringing not only his wife, but also their 10-year-old daughter. In the spring of 1964, the Improvement Era published a series of articles on the Church in Asia and identified Hinckley as president of the Hawaiian Oriental Missions. I'm guessing, since it's in quotes, that it wasn't actually what it was called, that's for whatever reason that they had written that. In 1964, Hinckley was appointed a board member of KIRO-TV and KIRO-AM-FM, which the LDS Church had just purchased. When the church formed Bonneville International Corporation later in 1964, Hinckley was named a vice president, a member of the board of directors, and a member of the executive committee. Hinckley circumnavigated the world on a trip with his wife in late 1964. He stopped in Tokyo for a missionary conference. He then traveled to South Korea, Hong Kong, and the Philippines as he had before. Next, he went to Thailand and held a meeting with a few church members, all of whom expatriates in the country at the time. Hinckley then traveled to Saigon and met with about 60 church members, mostly American military personnel. There were 2 Vietnamese citizens who had joined the LDS Church at the meeting in Saigon. Finally, he visited Singapore and then went to India. In India, he went to Madras and then Coimbatore, where Hinckley met, Paul Thirithuvados, who had written to church headquarters and asked for baptism. Hinckley went to Medikurai to see a school run by Thirithuvados. Hinckley decided not to baptize Thirithuvados at the time. The Hinckleys then traveled to Beirut. I'm not wondering why they mentioned that. It's kind of random. Where they met with a small group of church members and then on to Jerusalem. From there, they traveled to Greece, where they met with another small group of church members. There, they then proceeded to Frankfurt, where they stayed at the home of Ezra Taft Benson, who presided over the European mission, and his wife Flora. The Hinckleys then went to Brussels before they returned to Utah. Okay, you skipped a lot of things in between, but that's is interesting. I'm not sure why they were so detailed on that. Just to prove that he circumnavigated the globe. Okay. There was a lot of detail there that I felt was slightly unnecessary for a Wikipedia article. It's a bit much. In July 1965, Hinckley went to Hawaii, where he was involved in the first LDS temple services in Japanese. Also in 1965, Hinckley was involved in negotiations with the United States Selective Service officials that led to the establishment of a quota of 1 LDS missionary who would otherwise be drafted, being able to leave from a ward or branch every 6 months, with the quota transferable within any given LDS district or stake. Okay, so they basically got permission for more missionaries to go. That's cool. In the late 1960s, Hinckley was a key person in formulating official LDS church statements, such as the 1968 statement on the sale of liquor by the drink. In the early 1970s, Hinckley served as a chair of the executive committee of the Church Board of Education. In 1972, Hinckley became the initial head of the LDS Church's Public Affairs Department. In September 1972, Hinckley and his wife traveled with Church President Harold B. Lee and his wife Joan on a tour of the United Kingdom, Greece, Israel, and Italy. The visit including meetings with church members in Rome, a group of LDS youth at an event in the Santa Severa Resort on the coast of the... Why are you telling me this? In Milan, they held a press conference. You know what? I'm just going to skip this part because this is a little bit ridiculous on how much detail there is. Also in the 70s, Hinckley had supervisory assignments for the church in South America and later in Europe. He served on the church's executive committees for temples, missionary work, welfare services, priesthood, and the military. Hinckley was the chair of the executive committee over the 1980 commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the organization of the LDS Church. That was in, 1980. Sheesh. Okay, member of the First Presidency. On July 23rd, 1981, Spencer W. Kimball appointed Hinckley as a counselor in the First Presidency. After first counselor N. Eldon Tanner died in 1982, Kimball did not appoint a new counselor. As the 1980s progressed, more and more of the day-to-day affairs of the First Presidency fell to the healthier Hinckley. By 1984, Hinckley was the only publicly active member of the First Presidency. Yep. In 1984, the church formed area presidencies. Until then, church headquarters administered national and multinational areas. The area presidencies decentralized administration with presidencies living in locations around the world. So I just want to remind you that this was at the time when Spencer W. Kimball was in poor health, but he was mentally active and lucid up until the end. Ezra Taft Benson was not. So this is President Kimball who was still presiding when they made that change. I just wanted to throw that out there just in case that was confusing. During his time in Kimball's presidency, Hinckley presided over the dedication of 16 LDS temples. Among them was the Manila, Philippines temple. Hinckley dedicated it in 18 years after he had dedicated the first Philippine LDS chapel. Well, good for him. At the time of Kimball's death, Hinckley had dedicated nearly half of the then 36 temples. Yep. After Kimball's death in November 1985, Ezra Taft Benson became president of the church. Benson named Hinckley as first counselor and Thomas S. Monson as second counselor. In the early 1990s, Benson developed serious health problems which removed him from public view. Hinckley and Monson carried out many of the duties of the First Presidency until Benson died in 1994. Yeah, and they don't mention anything new that had happened, and like nothing new policy-wise, I mean. There were some new things, but like nothing that I would consider had to happen under the president of the church, yeah. During the presidencies of Kimball and Benson, most of the new temples were dedicated by Hinckley. Yeah. When Benson died in 1994, about half of the operating temples had been dedicated by Hinckley. Meanwhile, the Mark Hoffman documentary forgeries, bombings, and investigation occurred. The what? The news interest was global. The whole episode achieved epic proportions. Several books described the acquisition of supposed historical documents by Hinckley and others, such as The Secret Sale of the Stowell document, describing Joseph Smith's money digging pursuits. Using $15,000 of church funds, Hinckley bought the document from Hoffman. 2 years later, Hoffman leaked its existence to the Mormon history community. Under press inquiries, Hinckley acknowledged the document and released it. Later, bombing investigators proved that Hoffman had forged the document. Oh, good. The thing is, money digging pursuits, like, people accused Joseph Smith of that when he was alive. Like, he did try a couple of times to find buried treasure, but it was because someone hired him to do it. They're like, here, I'll pay you money if you'll help me dig for this. And he's like, okay. You know, I feel like I'll help you dig, but I doubt that this is going to do much. And he'd said that at the time, you know. And there was another time when somebody was like, I know where treasure is buried in Salem. And he's like, so show me where it is. And then he brought him there and couldn't find anything at all. And then he's like, oh, I can't remember. And he's like, okay, thank you for your help, you know. And that was the end of it. It's not like he was out actively searching for buried treasure. But even if he were, it's not that big a deal. Like, I don't understand, like, why people get so obsessed with it. I guess it's just to show, like, how silly he is. But, like, seriously? Come on, people. Don't you have better things to do? Like, like, that's all you can get on Joseph Smith? Dude. Okay. That's interesting. Like, yeah, he bought it because he wanted to have it under church control. Yeah? And then when people came up and started criticizing him for it, he's like, fine, you want to look at it? Here it is. There you go. Go ahead and look. Look all you want. That's what I bought. And then it came out as a forgery. It's like, yeah. Yeah. In 1992, Hinckley made an official visit to Rome, and he presented a copy of the Encyclopedia of Mormonism to the Vatican. Huh. Interesting choice. Not what I would have chosen, but hey, I'm not the president of the church. There you go. After Benson's death, Howard W. Hunter became president and retained Hinckley and Monson as counselors in the First Presidency. With Hunter as president of the church, the title of president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles fell to Hinckley because he was second most. Why do they keep explaining this? Like, this is so ridiculous to me. President of the church. Now, I remember a lot of this because this was my youth and young adulthood. So, I remember a lot of this. When Hunter died after a presidency of 9 months, Hinckley succeeded to the presidency of the church at the age of 84 on March 12, 1995. Hinckley immediately showed a change in approach and tone from his predecessors by making the meeting with the press. Yes, he was very open with the press, and he did a lot of press conferences and he worked with them instead of against them, yeah. There, his call was announced at an actual press conference, and reporters were invited to ask questions, which sent the reporters scrambling to figure out what they would actually ask. On November 2nd, 2006, Hinckley surpassed David O. McKay to become the oldest LDS church president in history. To that point. Hinckley was known for accelerating the building of temples. When he became president, there were 47 operating temples in the church. At the time of his death, there were 124. Over 2/3 of which have been dedicated or rededicated under Hinckley, with 14 others announced or under construction. Hinckley oversaw other significant building projects, including the construction of the conference center and extensive renovations of the Salt Lake Tabernacle. Yeah, I remember that. It was closed for a couple years. On September 23rd, 1995, Hinckley released The Family, A Proclamation of the World, a statement of belief and counsel regarding the sanctity of the family and marriage. It was prepared by the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12. In February 1996, there were more church members outside than inside the United States, which was quite a crazy thing at the time, yeah? Also in 1996, 60 Minutes aired an interview with Hinckley by Mike Wallace during a segment of the LDS Church. Yep, I remember that. It was really interesting to watch. In 1998, Hinckley was a guest on CNN's Larry King Live. I remember that too. Until his death, Hinckley maintained a friendship with both Wallace and Larry King. In November 2000, Hinckley spoke to the youth of the church and gave them 6 traits to work on, the B's, yeah. 6 B's. Be grateful, be smart, be clean, be true, be humble, be prayerful. These are pretty well known, which were first introduced in his New York Times bestseller, Standing for Something, and later expanded on in Way to Be. I have read both of those books. I think I have them on my bookshelf. Ah, yep, I do. There they are. They're really interesting because it was really inspiring to me as a young person at the time, and being like, oh yeah, this is really great because you can enumerate exactly the kind of traits you should have, and nobody had ever said that to the young people in that many words, and so it was really good to see. Anyway, on March 31st, 2001, Hinckley announced the creation of the Perpetual Education Fund. I remember that too. An endowment that provides loans to students in developing nations. On October 22, 2002, Hinckley participated in the dedication of the Gordon B. Hinckley Building at Brigham Young University, Idaho, in Rexburg, Idaho. That was the first building at BYU, Idaho, to be named for a living church president. Okay. In April 2003, Hinckley gave a sermon that addressed the ongoing war in Afghanistan and the Iraq War, which had just started 2 weeks earlier. I remember this very distinctly. I remember we, as a people in the U.S., were absolutely hurting, and we needed somebody to talk about it. We did. I remember that being very vivid. He said that as citizens, we are all under the direction of our respective national leaders. They have access to greater political military intelligence than do the people generally. He added, furthermore, we are a freedom-loving people, committed to the defense of liberty wherever it is in jeopardy. He also noted it may even be that the Lord will hold us responsible if we try to impede or hedge up the way of those who are involved in a contest with forces of evil and repression. So, he wasn't pro-war so much as he was pro-freedom, yeah. In March 2005, Hinckley, together with Thomas S. Monson and James E. Faust, celebrated their 10th anniversary as the First Presidency, the second time in the history of the Church that a First Presidency had continued for such a period of time without personnel changes, the first time occurring between October 1934 and May 1945, when J. Reuben Clark and David O. McKay served as counselors to Heber J. Grant. On January 24, 2006, Hinckley underwent surgery to remove a cancerous growth from his large intestines. He was then diagnosed with diabetes. I don't think that was terribly well known at the time. I don't remember hearing about that at the time. But then again, was I on my mission? It was just before my mission. So, I don't know. In June 2006, Hinckley traveled to Iowa City, Iowa to speak at a commemoration of the 150th anniversary of the start of the Mormon handcart companies. On June 23, 2006, his 96th birthday, Hinckley participated in a groundbreaking ceremony at Brigham Young University, BYU, in Provo, Utah, for a new building that was to be named in his honor. This building was named the Gordon B. Hinckley Alumni and Visitors Center and was completed and dedicated on Hinckley's 97th birthday. Okay. On March 31st, 2007, Hinckley rededicated the Salt Lake Tabernacle after extensive renovation. I remember that. They did that in General Conference. Yeah, one of Hinckley's last public addresses was on January 4th, 2008. Really? When he offered the prayer at the rededication of the Utah State Capitol. His final public appearance was a week before his death, the dedication of the Park Ward building on January 20th, 2008. He was active way to the end. That's crazy that he still did that himself. Like, we all knew that he was having trouble because he started walking with a cane, but he would make light of it and say it was because he was suffering from some vertigo. But, like, he didn't lean on it. He used it to steady himself when he was feeling dizzy. So he didn't need it all the time. So sometimes he would walk down and he would wave with his cane. Yeah. But, like, it was amazing how active he was up until the very, very end. During his tenure as president, Hinckley gave over 2,000 speeches. He traveled nearly 1 million miles over a lifetime to more than 160 countries, as he met with church members and dedicated meeting houses and temples. Hinckley's annual speeches at BYU were the subject of a study by the National Center for Voice and Speech at the University of Utah to analyze how the human voice changes with age. The 36 speeches by Hinckley were analyzed ranging from 1958, when he was 47 to 48, to 2007, the year prior to his death. The study showed how his voice started dropping in pitch in his 50s and continued until he was 70, when he began to develop a higher, thinner, old person voice. By his 80s, his voice became increasingly wavery, and the rate of his speech began to slow. And by his 90s, he would slur words. Hinckley was a good subject for the study, as the annual addresses were meticulously recorded and transcribed. In addition, he did not smoke, drink, sing, or engage in other activities that would put unnatural strain on his voice. That's true. That's interesting to me. Like how you could actually follow the development of his voice. It went from relatively like medium to like lower pitched, and then to thin, and then like to start to slow and slur as he aged. But like, I can understand that. That's interesting that they were able to follow the progress of age so very, very like distinctly. Temple dedications. When Hinckley became president, he had dedicated 23 of the church's 47 temples and had rededicated 4 of the remaining 24. As president, Hinckley presided over the dedication of 65 additional temples. Hinckley also rededicated 5 temples while president of the church, 4 of which he had dedicated initially. In all, Hinckley dedicated or rededicated 92 different temples, 70 of which as president of the church, and 97 different dedicatory services. I remember one day, although in the year 2000, they were dedicating so many temples that they had like all 3 of them on one day were, all 3 of the members of the First Presidency were dedicating temples on the same day. I remember that. It was one was President Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson and James E. Faust. It was very, very interesting. Or was it Henry B. Eyring at that point? I can't remember. Anyway, doesn't matter. Awards. On June 23, 2004, Hinckley's 94th birthday, U.S. President George W. Bush awarded Hinckley the Presidential Medal of Freedom in a ceremony at the White House. The press release was put forth by the White House stated, Gordon B. Hinckley has inspired millions and has led efforts to improve humanitarian aid, disaster relief, and education funding across the globe. Hinckley received many educational honors, including Distinguished Citizen Award from Southern Utah University, Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Utah, and 10 honorary doctorates from schools including, they're not going to list them all, just these are some of them, Westminster College, Utah State University, Utah Valley University, University of Utah, Brigham Young University, Idaho, Weber State University, Southern Utah University. That's only 8. I wonder why they didn't mention the other 2. He received the Silver Buffalo Award, which is the highest honor bestowed by the Boy Scouts of America, and was honored by the National Conference for Community and Justice for his contributions to tolerance and understanding in the world. In 1996, Hinckley received the Golden Plate Award and the American Academy of Achievement, presented by Awards Council member and philanthropist John Huntsman Sr. Okay, death and legacy. We're almost at the end. We can do this. On January 27, 2008, Hinckley died at the age of 97 while surrounded by family in his Salt Lake City apartment. According to a church spokesman, the death was due to causes incident to age. This is not a surprise. He was 97 years old. The Deseret Morning News reported that Hinckley had just gone through a treatment of chemotherapy a few days earlier and had worked until the very end. He was on chemo? Why was he on chemo? He must have had cancer, but like, wow, really? The day following Hinckley's death, thousands of LDS youth in 6 states organized a social network campaign to dress in Sunday best to honor Hinckley. I don't remember that. I know why. Jeez. I was on my mission at the time. I do remember being on my mission at the time, but yeah, that makes sense. Funeral services were held on February 2nd, 2008 at the General Conference Center in Salt Lake City, which was attended by tens of thousands. Hinckley was buried at the Salt Lake City Cemetery next to his wife, who had died almost 4 years earlier. Some of the soil that was used to bury him was imported from the grounds of the Preston, England Temple in Lancashire. Wow. This was done because Hinckley had been a missionary in this region of England. Hinckley was succeeded as president by Thomas S. Monson on February 3rd, 2008. Yep. In 2012, a 50-year-long longitudinal study of the development of Hinckley's voice, they just mentioned that. Okay, I'm skipping that. Hinckley's teachings as an apostle with a 2017 course of study, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. They all were, okay. All right, publications. This is more interesting. Hinckley, Gordon B. Teachings of the President of the Church, Gordon B. Hinckley. Why is this in reverse order? I just was expecting like the earliest to be first, and this is the latest first. That's not the order it was in, like in other ones we've read. Okay, whatever. I guess I'll read it backwards. 2008, My Dear Sisters, Inspiration for Women from Gordon B. Hinckley. I haven't read that one. I'll have to look at that one. 2006, One Bright Shining Hope, Messages for Women from Gordon B. Hinckley. 2005, Discourses of President Hinckley. 2002, Way to Be, 9 Ways to Be Happy and Make Something of Your Life. 2001, Truth Restored, A Short History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm pretty sure I have read that one. 2001, Walking in the Light of the Lord, A Message for Mothers. 2001, Stand a Little Taller. I've read that one too. 2000, Standing for Something, 10 Neglected Virtues That Will Heal Our Hearts and Homes. Yep, it's on my shelf right now. 1997, Teachings of Gordon B. Hinckley. 1989, Faith, the Essence of True Religion. 1981, Be Thou an Example. 1973, From My Generation to Yours with Love. 1951, James Henry Moyle, The Story of the Distinguished American and Honored Churchman. Really? Huh. I don't think he was a general authority, though. It's interesting to me. 1947, What of the Mormons? A Brief Study of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. 1943, A Brief Statement of Principle of the Gospel based largely upon the Compendium, Richard's Little, with excerpts from other writings, including also church chronology, priesthood ordinances, selected hymns. That is clearly an academic article. It's interesting. Okay, see also Alonza A. Hinckley, uncle, who was also an LDS apostle, and May Green Hinckley, stepmother. Oh, okay. Cool. So that was really long, and I did find some of that really, really fascinating. I think that what is most striking to me is that there's really nothing negative, and that's something that has always struck me about him, is that I also remember something. I remember shortly after 9/11, there were, like maybe a month or two, there were some interviews with clergymen from different, like, major churches, and President Hinckley was invited to be one of them that spoke on CNN, I think it was. And it wasn't his famous interview with Mike Wallace or whatever, but it was a general interview with a panel of other people, so he wasn't the only one. And it was interesting where they go through and they talked to one of the main Muslim leaders, and then they talked to a Hindi leader, they talked to a Jewish leader, they talked to one of the major leaders of the Catholic Church, although I believe that he was not the Pope. And then they talked to President Hinckley. And they had all of them speaking about their religion and about, like, what they believe and about, like, extremism and terrorism and things like that. And none of them condoned terrorism, but what struck me at the time was that President Hinckley gave the most clear answers, mincing words the least. Like, he was like, no, this is the way it is. And it was absolutely astounding how clear and concise he was able to speak. Whereas most of the other leaders were trying to be very diplomatic and trying to be, not show their religion in a bad light. No, this is what we believe. And he was just so very, very clear. And I remember that being something that I admired about him as a person. And there have been other presidents of the church that have not been that way. But he was someone who was very clear and to the point. And he didn't mince words. He said things like it is. If he felt like something needed to be changed, he said so. If he felt like something wasn't working the way it should, then he explained how it should work. And that's just the kind of person he was. And he's very energetic, and I really admire him as a person. So I hope you learned something here today, and I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.